talking about Passover and some of the twists and turns of Passover, some of the new customs and rituals, a little bit of a kind of look at Ashkenazi tradition and Sephardi tradition. And really, I think this year in particular, right, this is, I was saying, the cantor and I were talking, this is our first holiday where we're having our second observance of it on Zoom, right? Our second COVID, kind of experience of Passover. And I'm sure, people who are into numerology and people who are into Kabbalah have something wonderful to say about it. And when I become more learned, I'll share that with you. Please God in person next year. But how differently we can understand what it means to be coming through a narrow place, right? That's what we talk about when we talk about Passover. We come through Mitzrayim, right? What literally means a narrow place. And we understand perhaps better than any other time for many, what it feels like to be squeezed, right? For some of us figuratively, and for many others literally, right? Where their chest cavities have been squeezed and they don't have the expansiveness that they need to pass through fully. So we're going to look at Passover together. We're going to also have some discussion and invite your questions, as always. Either raise your hand or raise your digital hand or put it in the chat box for us. You might see transcription. Give me a thumbs up if you see transcription across the bottom of your screen. Okay, so if the transcription for you is helpful, by all means leave it. If it's not something for you that is that works, you can go either to where it says CC, closed captioning, or transcription, or your three dots that say more. And then if you click on that, you'll see there's a spot for live transcript or show subtitle or hide subtitle, and you can do with it as you see fit. But we're hoping that it gives those who prefer to have both the spoken and the visual, the words across the bottom of the screen, full access, and at your discretion you'll use it or not. So I don't know how many of you saw the article that Rabbi Rick Jacobs wrote called Pandemic Passover Take 2, The Long Journey Through the Wilderness. Has anybody seen that article that he wrote? Let me just do with a nod. No, okay. So I could really kind of tell you anything, right? So he wrote. He's wonderful. He is the president of our movement, and I want to just show you just a small excerpt for those. He's wonderful. This is him. He's the president for the Union for Reform Judaism, a rabbi and a teacher. And always noteworthy, I think, to know he was a ballet dancer before he came to the rabbinate too, which I love. He's like 6'1", and he is like a gazelle, and he's wonderful, and he's just a mensch among mention, and scholarly and thoughtful and kind. And he wrote this beautiful article called "Pandemic Passover Take 2: The Long Journey Through the Wilderness." So I just want to read you one little excerpt, which is right here where it says, "We had no idea." He writes, "So we had no idea when and how we'd get out of the Egypt of COVID-19, and there is still plenty we don't know. And yet when we sit down together this year, we will do so having made it through the worst part of the worst pandemic in recent memory. With the vaccine slowly freeing us from this contemporary plague, I believe we will soon begin to taste the rebirth of spring with its hope of better days ahead." And just one more paragraph here. "So much has changed since last year. Our homes have become our virtual synagogues." We've talked about this. Our schools, our workplaces, small seders and Zoom seders, once unthinkable, have become the new normal. And though we do our best to glean some positivity out of the chaos, we know that for too many of us, the angel of death did not pass over our homes, forcing us to mourn without the comforting physical embrace of family and friends. And we will surely notice and shed tears for the newly empty chairs and missing Zoom squares at this year's Seder. So I just, I thought it was such a beautiful way to start the conversation around Passover, and thought we would do a little bit of learning together. I'm going to share a little bit of an introduction, and then the cantor is going to take it from there. So we titled this Moses, Miriam, and Matzah, Signs of Wonders of Passover. And Cantor Braun, I don't know if you saw, but when I first put the slide up, your name showed up. And then when I do it in the full mode, I don't know where it is, but this is being presented by both of us. And I hope you saw her name at the beginning.
I did. It looks
Okay, good, good. I don't know. I know it's some magic ink that I have. I don't know what it is, but not planned. So we know, right? Moses and Miriam, brother and sister. Right? We like the alliteration, Moses, Miriam, and Matzah. But there's so much for us to think about and wonder about with Passover. So, oh, here it comes. It's like on. Yeah, there we go. Ta-da! So what is Passover, right? If I asked you to stitch together the story, I'm guessing in quite quickly you could do it for us. Pesach in Hebrew, it's a major Jewish spring festival. We know it celebrates our freedom and family as we remember our exodus from Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. If, by the way, if the print isn't big enough for you, go to your view screen and you should be able to increase the size of the slide. For me, it's quite large, but for you, it might not be. The main observances we know of this holiday center around the Seder, right? In our time around the Seder table, the 2 nights of Seder, which this year come on Saturday night and Sunday night, and have a festive meal and a whole set of rigors for how we observe, and the prohibition against eating chametz, and we're going to talk about that as well, and the commandment to eat matzah. It's on the 15th day of the month, the Hebrew month of Nisan. And we read from our Haggadah, which really comes from the same word as Agadah, the root of which means telling or story or legend or lore, I guess is another way of putting it. But really the telling, which is such a wonderful way to look at this story, right? And this story in particular, which I'm hoping each of you is in some way, shape, or form will have an opportunity to pass through, every pun intended, pass through on Saturday and Sunday night by really putting your arms around the story this year and making deeper understanding and meaning from it this year. Oh, every year we pray, but this year in particular, when we've got some more discretionary time and space to really dig deep and to examine different parts of the story. And we have some prayers and some rituals and readings and songs, and we've got frogs that can hop, and we've got plagues that that we remember. And I remember when my kids were little, we used to put squirts of red food dye into water. And now that I think about it as as a full-grown adult with kids who are older, I think I'm not really sure that the plagues are what we want to highlight, right? But what if you were looking at the Passover story, what would you want to lift up? What would be the part of the story that you would want to lift up and to think about in terms of retelling our people's unbelievable story of Exodus and freedom, so that every generation, and that's the command, right? Lador vador, that every generation may learn and remember this story as being not just important, but pivotal in Jewish history, right? It depends, it's either 7 or 8 days, depending on how you hold and depending on whether you're in Israel or in the diaspora, whether you're Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox. And the 8th day is built in as a kind of cushion from a time, as we have with most of our second day observances and our extension of our holidays, when the rabbis weren't quite sure how to discern the difference between day and night. They didn't have digital clocks, and there wasn't an order in particular for us to be absolutely certain of the time. So it's one of 3 major pilgrimage. We call it the Shalosh Regalim, the pilgrimage festivals, and we're supposed to actually go to Israel. Would that we could this year, and commemorate our exodus from Egypt. Although I have to tell you, in my the cantor and I, and our first year of seminary takes place in Jerusalem. It's a mandatory year for Hebrew proficiency and immersion, and really for us to fall even more deeply in love with Israel. And it is also, Passover is historically a time of school break in Israel. So cantor, I don't know what you did during your school break when you were in Israel. My oldest brother came from Toronto to visit me. He was worried that I would be alone for Passover. It was so nice. He saved and he saved and he saved. I was, 22 years old, and he's 8 years older. So he was just starting his career and just kind of figuring it all out. And what did we do over Passover break when he came to visit me in Israel? We traveled to Egypt, actually. We went to Egypt, and we did the Sedarim, we did the Seders with our family in Israel, and then we say in Hebrew dafka, like ironically, in a strange twist of fate. And we traveled to Egypt to see not just because of the proximity, but because it seemed fitting at Pesach time. And little did we know in our naivete that finding kosher for Passover food might be a little tricky in Egypt during Passover, but we made our way, and it was a wonderful, amazing, memorable trip as well, and time well spent. and then some, and then some. This is when we really strive to imagine what it must have been like for our ancestors and their parents, right? Those of you who are in the sandwich generation, right? Their parents and their young children, their siblings, right? What it must have been like to be leaving a system that they knew and going into the wilderness without a clue of what was coming, with no sense of security, with innumerable doubts about what was going to lie ahead, and to have the faith and the courage and the communal wherewithal to move forward in the most aggressive of times and difficult and worrisome of times. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper, and we're going to look at the customs between Ashkenazim, Eastern European Jews, and Sephardim, right? So we talk about chametz versus kitniot, right? These are some of the food rigors around how we keep Passover. So we know that there are 5 particular species that are prohibited during Passover, written in the Bible, and they're written on the left: barley, oats, rye, spelt, and wheat. Get a good look at that picture on the left, and then block it out of your mind for the next week. Just look and feel, and then know it's 1 week, right? 1 week where we deal with it, right? Those are the 5 species, and anything made with those species. So you're going to ask, really, isn't matzah made from wheat and the wheat flour? And the answer is yes, it is, unless you buy a special one. But the way it's processed, right, and the time in which matzah is made, so it doesn't have the opportunity to leaven, right, we know that doesn't have the time to rise, is supposed to be our reminder that our ancestors didn't have enough time, we know, to let their bread rise. And so we connect ourselves, every year when we think, okay, well, why am I doing it? And it's just symbolic, right? The idea is to actually embody our understanding of the story, right? For us to actually imagine what it must have been like. Not that it's not like self-flagellation. We're not supposed to torture ourselves, right? We're supposed to spend this one intentional week where we make some different choices in terms of what we put into our bodies, right? And so we refrain from any foods that have these 5, or drinks, right, that have these 5 origins to them, with some exceptions in terms of processing, like matzah in particular. So when we look at Ashkenazim, right, when we look at Eastern European Jews, how many of you eat charoset? How many of you love charoset? I'm not a good cook, but it's one of the things that I make well. And actually, I make a Sephardic charoset. I'm Ashkenazi, but I make a Sephardic one. An Ashkenazi one is usually made with apples and wine and walnuts, while a Sephardic one usually has dates in it as well. It's got more of a jam-like texture to it, and walnuts and wine, and sometimes vinegar, which gives it a little bit of a kick. That it should have a little zest to it in terms of remembering that time and what was needed, or the vigor that was needed to get through that time. On the right-hand side of your page, you see all those little pebbly things, right? They look like beans and legumes, which is what they are. They're called kitniot in Hebrew. This is a whole category of foods that historically Ashkenazim did not eat, but Sephardim did and do eat during Passover. This includes, you see that list, rice and corn and millet and string beans and green peas and dried beans and lentils and soybeans and chickpeas. And historically, we Ashkenazim were forbidden from eating them, or anything that was made with them. In an earth-shattering, I know this is what's earth-shattering in Judaism, in an earth-shattering move, in 800 years, the first time, in 2016, so incredibly recently, the conservative movement actually relaxed, you see this on your slide, a 13th century ban on eating kitniot, allowing, and not just allowing, but saying halachically, according to Jewish law, if you are an Ashkenazi Jew, if you're an Eastern European Jew, you can eat kitniot. This whole category on the right-hand side of your screen, right, it is open to you as a Jew. So let me ask you, let me increase my screens for a second. Let me ask you, how many of you, with a show of hands or digital hands, how many of you are Ashkenazim? Just keep your hands up so I can see it and everybody else can see it as well, if you're an Eastern European Jew. And how many of you are Sephardim? Nobody? Okay, let me ask you the next question. How many of you eat kitniot during Passover? How many of you who have your hands up did before 2016? Wild, right? Wild. You see each other? I hope you see each other's hands, right? It's pretty amazing to think that we needed, right? At first, it was called the takana. It was called like a workaround, according to Jewish law, like a Shabbos elevator, right? Is a workaround kind of thing. But really, there's nothing prohibitive according to Jewish law. This wasn't actually a workaround. Technically, there's nothing wrong with eating, there never was. It's called a fence around the Torah. And the worry was that many of those foods that you see on the right-hand side of your screen were actually typically processed somewhere where they might come into contact with chametz. It's the if-then rule in the Talmud, right? If there's a chance that it might be in contact with chametz on the left-hand side, right, then you ought not to, because you might accidentally eat it, right? I know that there are some people who are traditionally observant who won't accept flowers during Yantif, during Pesach time, from a florist, because that florist might have been eating something while he or she was putting together the floral arrangement, and there might inadvertently be chametz in there, right? And so they don't bring anything out at all. One other category I remember so well during some of you know I took a year off from rabbinical school and lived quite a traditional, an Orthodox Jewish life while I was, figuring things out. And there's a whole category, Esther, you'll probably know this word. It's called gebruchts in Yiddish, which is dipping, right? It's the dipping that you shouldn't do anything with your matzah that makes it swell, that gives it the appearance of puffing back up to its original form, which, by the way, nixes all of those delicious things that we tend to make in the casserole, kugel kind of form, right? That you ought not to not do any of that. Judy says, in 2016, I served rice and it just didn't feel right, right? It's amazing, right? It's amazing, right? It's just, there's something that just, you feel like you're doing something that's sneaky, right? But it's completely allowed within halakha. But this is where we see the rub between minhag, which is custom, and law, right? Where the minhag becomes the law in the way we observe, right? So interesting for us. Let me take you to the next one. So here are some customs that I thought would be really interesting before I turn it to the cantor in a few moments. Here are some customs from some different countries. There's an Afghani custom of scallions. Maybe you've heard about this, recalling the persecution of slavery. A bunch of long scallions are given to each person at the Seder table, and as the song Dayenu is sung, participants actually walk around and they bop each other on the head or on the shoulder with this bunch of scallions. I'm a lover. I'm a lover, not a fighter. I'm not going to do that, right? The notion of bopping people around, right, does not appeal to me at all. But they're supposed to be reenacting what it must have been like, right, with this very serious, moment in slavery. Gives the kids something funny to do. So I'll leave that with you to decide what you think about it. But that's an Afghani custom, and some others have adopted as well. In Poland, there was a reenactment of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. In their living rooms on the seventh day of Passover. Families would actually pour water onto their floor in their homes, hike up their long coats, right? You're thinking shtisel, I am too, and then say the names of the towns in the region they would pass while making their crossing, right? Amazing how people embody Passover to really give it a third dimension. In Cochin, in India, they take preparation for Pesach so seriously. It begins right after Hanukkah, which is incredible. This tiny little Jewish population in Cochin. And they believe that if a Jewish woman, were to make even the slightest mistake in her cleaning and her preparation for Pesach during this 100 days before the Seder itself, that, God forbid, the lives of her husband and her children would be at risk. That's how seriously they look at the prep for the cleaning, the preparation, the ridding their houses of, right, with a feather and a candle, right? We know you're supposed to illumine every corner of your home with a candle or now maybe a flashlight, and take with a feather and scoop it out with a feather, right? This was really meant to be to ensure the purity of the Pesach ritual, of making absolutely sure that there isn't even a crumb of chametz anywhere in your house, right? Houses were scraped and repainted immediately after Purim, and wells would be drained and scrubbed, so that there was not even a chance that rice or any kind of chametz would be found anywhere during Pesach, right? And it was for them a way to ensure that they were observing properly. Then you see on the right-hand side of your page in England, they would actually mix the dust, right? The mortar, right? Goes back to our charoset. They would actually take some of the dust of bricks into their, right? Yeah, right. I see your faces, and put it into their charoset, a symbol of the mortar used to hold the bricks together, you know, in the walls that the Jews built, right? There's embodying Pesach, and there's embodying Pesach, and interesting to know what people are also doing. In Ethiopia, they did things a lot like the Israelites did, and have a custom you see after Operation Moses and Joshua, they actually break all of their dishes and make new ones to symbolize a complete break from the past and a brand new start. If you have seen any of the footage, it is extraordinary from Operation Moses and then Joshua afterwards, where almost 8,000 Jews came from Sudan to Israel, made safe passage to Israel. And this symbolically, and then for them quite literally breaking from their past, was reflected in breaking dishes and starting anew each year. In Spain, the leader in 14th century, the leader would walk around the table 3 times with the Seder plate in his hand, tapping it on the heads of each guest, and many Moroccan and Turkish and Tunisian Jews also followed suit. And they would actually go through, feels like a duck, duck, goose with your Seder plate. They would go through and they would actually offer a blessing to each person whose head was tapped. And this comes from the custom of uprooting the Seder plate so that guests might ask questions about the Jews in Egypt, that we get ourselves up out of our comfortable place and do something physical to imagine what it's like, right? Then we look at what people actually wear, right? So some would wear white to reflect a sense of purity and holiness, like the way we do at the High Holy Days. And some from our biblical passages, you see from Exodus, it says that the Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. And Hungarian Jews would then go on to actually mirror this by making sure that they had silver and gold on jewelry actually on their Seder plate. I'm going to ask you about your customs in a minute, but I just want to show you a couple of substitutions. Perhaps you know some of these things. So we know the typical things, and we'll talk about it at the Seder on Sunday as well, at the Temple Seder. Hopefully you will at your own Sedarim too. But we know if I went through and asked you about all the different symbols, right, you would probably be able to tell us what they were. So I want to just go through and tell you a handful of Seder plate additions and substitutions, maybe to tickle some thought about what you might include on your Seder plate this year. So we know the shank bone, right? The zroa is there to represent the sacrifice that the Israelites had to bring to the temple in Jerusalem during their times. And if you're a vegetarian or vegan, right, that's not going to work. So vegetarians and vegan actually use a beet on their plate to reflect that. An orange we're going to talk about in a minute, and Miriam's cup as well, symbolizing it's got water in it, celebrating Miriam's well and the importance of water during their trek in the desert, and the importance of women during the Exodus as well. Here are some additions, and then I will close. This comes from Susanna Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel's daughter, right? An orange. You can look at that story. It's a fascinating story as well. An orange on the Seder plate to make sure that there is diversity and respect and acknowledgement of Jews who are LGBTQ+, and make sure that we strive for equality and equity. Miriam's cup we just talked about. A potato for Ethiopian jewelry, but we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. A piece of fair trade chocolate or cocoa beans to make sure that we are focused on freedom for all, not just for some, and the freedom of laborers. A banana for refugees, similarly. A pine cone for prison reform, cashew for the troops, and an acorn for indigenous land. And many people have done work around that. So we're going to look at some of these questions. I want to make sure the cantor has enough time to do her part, and then we'll come back and we'll look at some of these questions, and I'm happy to answer for you at that time any questions you might have about some of those symbols and some of those customs. And then we really want to hear, we want to see your items. Actually, Cantor, do you want to see their items first, or do you want to do your part first? We would love it if you would unmute yourselves and show us your Passover items that you brought. And why don't maybe I will call people. Okay, Esther, I see you. Tell us what you brought.
I'm named after this grandmother Esther, who traditionally, of course, I never met. this is the matzah for the 3 pieces of matzah. And so it must be over 100 years old.
And who
that
made
my
it?
moth-
Who made it? Who made
My
it?
grandmother, who I
Wow.
was named for, grandmother Esther, who I was named for, that my mother gave me.
Beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
since I'm so old already, and I didn't know her, it's got to be, I don't know.
Beautiful. Beautiful to connect those dots, right? Right. And it says Be'erev, right? Hold it up again. It says Be'erev. Right. Right. For the evening that we that we must eat matzah, right? And then it's got all the symbols around. That's what it says in the Hebrew.
And you know, it's got
pockets
pockets.
For each of the 3 pieces. Beautiful. Thank you. Let's go from Esther to Esther. What did you bring? If you didn't bring, that's fine too.
But I will tell you, I didn't bring it. I have from my parents a copper Seder plate, and I have no idea what, because I'm not familiar with anything else ceremonial that's copper, and it looks like a regular Seder plate, and it's very hard to clean. It doesn't like the bitter herbs at all.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what I bring to my family. And I will say, I also had a grandmother, Esther, for whom I was named and whom I never met. Esther.
You guys should talk. I love that.
Uh-huh.
I love that. Raise your hand just so I can see. I don't want to call on you if you don't have an item that you want to share. But raise your hand if you brought an item that you wanted to share, or you want to tell us about an item a ritual item that's important to you at Pesach time. Nobody?
Renee is rising.
Yeah, please, Renee. Thank you.
Yeah, I just had to go grab them. So I have this beautiful, I don't know if you can see it. Probably can't see it. Oh, this stupid background makes everything blank out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
No,
Anyway,
no, put it in front of your shirt. Put it in front of your shirt. Stand up. There we go. No, maybe not. Sorry.
Well, it
Yeah.
tries. Anyway, it's for the matzah. It's a matzah cover, and my daughter brought that for me when she went to Israel on one of her trips. And then this is our, you won't be able to see this either, but this is our Seder plate that I like this one. We had an older one that somebody had given us when we got married, but it was hard to clean and everything. This has little individual little dishes on it that, and underneath it, it says what's supposed to go there. You know, it's got it in Hebrew, and then it's got it in English. And then you have this little dish. So instead of having, you know, this whole big thing that you've got to clean, that's a monstrosity, it's much easier to clean with this. But my new favorite thing is this matzah mask. I have to tell you, I have been putting that thing on whenever I'm on Zoom with anybody and going, look at this, right?
Yes, for sure. It's what our ancestors were when they came out of Egypt. For sure.
Yeah, it's going to end up being my favorite mask of all my masks.
Oh my, where did you get it?
So
I got it from Rabbi Till.
Oh,
in a little goodie bags from the
Little
drive.
goodie bags.
Yeah, I don't know if there's some more left, but if you didn't get it, you can check it in the office. I'm not sure if there are more, but we
oh,
can.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Are they all gone?
The idea behind having ritual items that are beautiful and unique to you, beautiful however you understand that, it comes from a sense of the word chidur mitzvah, that you are supposed to make any mitzvah that you do more beautiful, right? So your items shouldn't be, it's not that they should be, it shouldn't be like idolaters, but you should have something that helps you elevate the ritual to something that is lovely and wonderful, right? And these items, unlike our Shabbat candlesticks or our challah covers, right? You know, our Pesach items tend to get used really only for 2 nights a year. So if you don't have an item yet that's important to you, this is a good year to do some, you know, we're spending so much time online. This is a good year to either make or look to purchase something to connect ourselves again in that physical way to being able to observe and try to understand the story by way of ritual. And this is how we do it. This is how we do it. So Cantor, I'm going to turn it over to you and then answer any questions that you have at the end.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. A beautiful presentation. So, Rabbi, to mention that we'll talk about, of course, Miriam cup. So I was thinking first, let's sing a song, a Miriam song, and if you have a tambourine or anything that you wanna clapped hands or maracas, something that makes nice sound. We'll start singing. So, thank you, Esther. I'm sure you know the song and you can join me in the chorus. And the women dancing with the cymbals, follow Miriam as she sang her song. Sing a song to the one who we exalted. Miriam and the women dance and dance the whole night long. And Miriam was a weaver of unique variety. The tapestry she wove was what she sang a history. With every strand and every thread she crafted her delight. A woman touched with spirit, she dances towards the light. And together on the chorus, and the women dancing with the cymbals, follow Miriam as she sing a song. Sing a song to the one who be exalted. Miriam and the women dance and dance the whole night long. When Miriam stood upon the shores, she gazed across the sea. The wonder of this miracle she soon came to believe. Whoever thought the sea would part with outstretched hand, and we would pass to freedom and march to promised land. And the women dancing with the cymbals, follow Miriam as she sang her song. Sing a song, the one who be exalted. Miriam and the women dance and dance the whole night long. And Miriam the prophet took her cymbal in her hand, and all the women followed her, just she had planned. And Miriam raised her voice and sang, she sang with praise and might. We've just lived through the miracle, we gone to dance tonight. And the women dancing with the cymbals, follow Miriam as she sang her song. Sing a song, the one we exalted. Miriam and the women dance and dance the whole night long. Oh, thank you. Everybody now in the Miriam spirit. So we'll talk about, actually, Rabbi and I picked the same picture. Miriam's role in the Torah. So I'm just going to stop screen share and just open for discussion. If you have any comments, why Miriam's role, why Miriam is so important in the Torah. Who is Miriam and what is her role? Sharon.
She's the sister of Moses.
Right.
I learned so much the other night, so I know that now. The other night.
Great.
Yeah. And she's just such an important person. You know, she stayed by Moses and then helped to move him into the water.
Right. Yes. Anybody else wants to add about Miriam? Why do we give so much attention to Miriam? What is her role in the Bible, in the Torah? So we just sang a song, right? That's a little clue, right? We sang a song. When did she sing a song in the Torah? She's led people in song, led women in song when? Judy, you read of Sharon?
Well, she led them in song when they were crossing the Red Sea. But
Exactly.
earlier, when Moses was in the basket and Pharaoh's daughter came to get the baby, she went up to her and said, "Oh, would you like a Jewish wet nurse for the baby?" And brought her mother in. So that her mother got to raise him.
Right, so she basically saved her brother and he was raised Jewish. So good, great comments. Anybody else? So I think we covered all the points. So here's Miriam, actually in Hebrew, means, it has a lot of meanings. It means beloved, rebellious, means warrior of strength. So as you mentioned, she saved her brother life by guiding him down the waters of the Nile River. So as you said, she led a victory song, right? She danced women in the singing after they crossed the sea. And the third one, I have 1, 2, 3. She was followed by a continuous well of spring water that sustained the Israelites in the desert. And that's why there is also an association with Miriam's name and Miriam's well, as the water obviously sustain us and help us survive in the desert. So here's some, the name in Hebrew is Koth Miriam. Koth means cup, Miriam is Miriam. In English, Miriam's cup. So here there is even more about Miriam's cup. Miriam's cup is a symbol of Maim Haim. Maim Haim is an expression that we say living waters, but it's also a symbol of divine power to sustain, to heal, to renew. And as I said, the Miriam's cup is a symbol that sustains us in the desert, in the journey. As if we compare to Eliyahu's cup, the Eliyahu's cup is seen as a symbol of future messianic time. But Miriam's cup, it helps us to nurture, sustain, and heal, and renew now as we exist. So we usually fill Miriam's cup with water, and usually it's done after Dayenu, singing Dayenu. Some people fill it in the beginning of the Seder, so it depends on the custom. So it also represents, as we said, a woman's role in Exodus, and sometimes the women, gets overlooked, right, in the Torah. So the Talmud says this interesting expression. I mean, it's not expression, but it's written in the Talmud, that if it wasn't for the righteousness of the women of the generation, we would not have been redeemed from Egypt, right? If it wasn't for the righteousness for the women of that generation, we would not have been redeemed from Egypt. So I'm just going to stop the share. So what do you think that means? If it wouldn't be for the righteousness of the women in that generation, obviously when we were ready to exit, we wouldn't be having Exodus. So what does it mean?
Well, and all of you who just heard Rabbi Epstein speak as well about Shifra and Puah, what did she teach us? And Miriam, right? I mean, there's so many righteous women who changed the course of history, right? Miriam chief among them, but what was the role of women? Most of you who are women on this call, right? Happens to be interesting tonight.
Right.
Not exclusively, but and many of you with strong biblical names I see you writing.
Sharon, you want to?
Oh, the women were very, very strong. They were defiant. They, it's interesting because even, women met, even like in years past, and today it's always the women who stand by other women in times of crisis and sadness and give that support. And I just remember one time going to Buffalo for a pro-choice rally, and women just did a lot of defiant acts. Because women, I think women have strong values and they act on them. They don't just keep them within themselves. So I think that's how it was in the past.
Excellent. So anybody else, remember the decree that the Pharaoh made that every baby boy should be killed? And the midwife saying that by the time we arrive, the Jewish women are so strong, they're like beasts. They just give birth to the babies and we are late, basically. They just give birth. So this is one reason why women were so strong, as you said, Sharon. But also, when men worked as slaves in the fields, women were so courageous. They always went to the fields to feed men, to make them, lunch, whatever, food, to take care of them, and to encourage, marriage and everything to continue to procreate. So this is what it means. This saying from Talmud. Marlene.
Well,
And they were the nurturers. We talked about the midwives being so connected to the process of birth and the fact that everyone had had a right to live, that life was so important.
Mm-hmm.
And also a lot about using their minds as opposed to brute force, to figure the way around Pharaoh's decrees.
Yes, yes, very good. Anybody else want to add anything? If not, we move on. So this is excellent comments. So the origin of the Coast Miriam first started in Boston by Rosh Chodesh group, a women's Rosh Chodesh group, and they were the first who put the Coast Miriam on the Seder in 1980. So Stephanie Lou Ritari created this new ritual, and since then, this tradition of Coast Miriam filled with water travels around the world. In Europe, European countries also do that, in Israel and in the United States. So became very popular, and it's just amazing that it just started in the 1980s.
I know.
So I just wanted to show you a few, beautiful cups I found in the beautiful, very contemporary. This is just a little deviation. So then other Passover rituals, Rabbi will touch on them a little bit, and I will maybe go a little bit in depth. So did you know, right? There is an orange, and Rabbi explained that we put the orange to honor LGBT. And also it's very interesting that when Heschel, while lecturing in Florida, Susanna Heschel, she was a professor of Jewish studies in Dartmouth College. She was the first who included orange in the recognition of gay and lesbian Jews. But when she gave a lecture in Florida, she was like hushed by a man or denounced, saying that a woman belongs on a bima as much as the orange belongs to the Seder plate. So there's much to be said.
Sorry, Cantor, can I just interject for a second? Which was part 2 of the first offensive part of the statement, which was Susanna Heschel's recounting of somebody who said, there's as much room for a lesbian in Judaism as there is for a crust of bread on the Seder plate. It's kind of a 2-pronged offensive piece of why we put an orange on the Seder plate. So it's a both and.
Right. Thank you, Rabbi. So then Sephardic and Mizrahi rituals, right? And Rabbi already mentioned that there is all this Kitniyot family that we allowed, that the Sephardic are allowed, and then why the Sephardic Seders are different. And there is this like a myth that everybody wants to be Sephardic on Passover, right? Because they're allowed to eat all this Kitniyot, and we are very strict as Ashkenazim. So just a little bit, overview. So Ashkenaz in Hebrew means it's a word for German, right? And in practice, most Jews have families come from Eastern Europe, like you came from, European countries, because all of you are Ashkenazic, Germany, Poland, Russia. So we all are Ashkenazim. But Sephardic, it's also from Spain and the Arab world, okay? They also call Sephardim. It's very interesting that if you meet a Jew and she tells you her last name is Ashkenazi, that she's most certainly Sephardi, because long time ago, many generations ago, her ancestors, like European ancestors, went to live among the Sephardi Jews. And that, like a nickname, stuck with the person. The Ashkenazi was a nickname. And the name stuck, right? But even though the family took all the culture and all the Sephardic traditions, and they became Sephardic Jews, they still, considered to be the Ashkenazi. So if you see the name Ashkenazi last name, it's most likely a Sephardic Jew. It's just ironic. So here's most of us remember, like from, and I know Rabbi already covered most of it, that we remember 2 things, right, from like Hebrew school. The Sephardic only come from Spain, which is not true, right? And there are many other countries they come from in Arab world, and Sephardic Jews eat rice and beans on Passover. Well, we just learned from Rabbi that they not only eat rice and beans, okay? They eat corn and green beans and peas and lentils and chickpeas and peanuts and much more, okay? So in other words, Sephardic Jews eat food from the category kitniyot, right? That kitniyot means legumes. I can't even say it in English, legumes, but I can say it in Hebrew, kitniyot, and it's forbidden for Ashkenazi Jews. And we learned that it looks so good. Okay, so we're gonna move on. So we talked about rice, and this is very interesting. A tradition that rice considered to be kosher for Pesach for Sephardic Jews, and now we learn that since 1960, right, Rabbi? 62?
2016.
2016,
Yeah,
right?
most recently, yeah.
Yeah, it's allowed, for Ashkenazic Jews, but some Ashkenazic Jews feel still uncomfortable. Understandable. So it was a tradition among Egyptian Jews to purchase all the Pesach rice 1 month before the holiday. And for some families, that meant that they would buy about 40 pounds of rice, and the rice would be placed in the middle of the table, and the family would sift and wash the rice, then divide into 8 portions, right? 8 days of Pesach. Rice is, as we said, as part of kitniyot and is allowed. So I don't want to repeat. So here's the Seder plate in Morocco, right? The Seder plate is brought to the Seder table with a great ceremony. And it would be covered with a beautiful scarf, and the family would sing. The plate arrived at the table. You just can imagine that, right? And before it was set down, the Seder plate would be placed on the child's head, and then it would be rotated for everybody to see. So here the Seder plate in Tunisia, Sicily, and Sardinia, right? So the Seder plates arrived at the table and sets at the head of the Seder leader. And the plate is then passed from person to person around the table, held for a moment on each head by a family member. I think Rabbi mentioned that. The Seder begins in this manner to demonstrate that we were slaves in Egypt and carried heavy burdens on our heads. So matzah, this is interesting. There is a tradition described in Egyptian and Moroccan Jewish tradition, where they would have 3 pieces of matzah tied up in a napkin and to make like a little sack. And the sack would be passed around the table, like on the shoulder, like this, right? And first, the sack would be held on the person's right shoulder, and the leader would ask, him, where are you going, right? And the person with the shoulder sack would reply, I'm from Egypt. And the leader then asked the same person, where are you going? The person would change, shift the sack to the left shoulder and say, I'm going to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim. Will you come with me? And then the person will say yes, and then you pass around all the participants and they repeat the same thing. So this is kind of, did anybody here heard about the tradition? No? It's kind of, very different.
I love it better than bopping people on the head.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. I find this very fascinating. And I read about this like a long time ago, and it's just hard to believe. It's called pan de semita, or Semitic bread. And Passover bread it's eaten by Jews. It was eaten by Jews in Spain, right before the Inquisition, and before Jewish people escaped the Inquisition in the 1692, in the 16th century. So and some of them went to Mexico, what's now Mexico, right? And it's the border of Texas. So, and there are some historians who believe that the entire Caucasian population of Mexican is of Jewish origin. Okay, they escaped the persecution and Inquisition and fled what's now Mexico. And then they kept the culture, they kept the customs, but year after year they assimilated. And And so it was the bread that called pandesemita, is always eaten around Pesach, Passover season. Even families who don't understand their Jewish connection, who don't think they're Jewish or don't even associate that they're Jewish, they always make this Semitic bread, and it's always unleavened and made by combining 2 cups of flour, 1/2 cup of water, few tablespoons of olive oil, and baked unleavened. And Mexicans say the pork lard is prohibited because it's called Semitic, right? And only olive oil may be used. So I just find this fascinating that, there's this whole, population, a whole community. They might not even know their Jewish origin, but they observe traditions. And we know some, Jews who were forced to convert, right? And then they assimilated. I don't know if one of you know, some of you know, but Rabbi, you probably know, like a few years ago, there was the whole community in Spain who converted back to Judaism because they found out that they were born Jewish and their ancestors were Jewish and they were forced to convert to Christianity. So 10 plagues, right? The Yemenite Jews follow a custom that become a minhag. Minhag means tradition for many of us. So when each plague is said out loud, each plague is said out loud, so the leader would, put a little bit of wine to the tin can, and then they would put on all the way in the backyard, very far, right? And that person would whisper, "May this go to all other enemies and haters. May they create no suffering for us or for themselves. Amen." And those people who's sitting in the table, they have to be very quiet so they can hear that loud whisper from the backyard, right? And I don't know how you can hear, but obviously maybe the backyard is very small. So in Greece, actually they put vinegar in a can instead of wine when all the plagues are said. So also just interesting, vinegar, right? Makes sense. And I think Rabbi also mentioned that in Italy and Iran and Afghanistan, people have this green onion and they go around and they, during the evening, they just smack each other or whatever, tap with their onion. So it reminds us that it was a miracle that we were freed from the lash of oppression. So basically, the bunch of onion and hitting each other, not hitting, but maybe smacking a little bit, obviously explains that we are oppressed as slaves. The haroset, right? So I know Rabbi also mentioned that for Ashkenazic homes, the apple is the most important ingredient because when it gets dark, right, it reminds us that it's color of mortar. For Sephardic Jews, they put dates, and some Ashkenazic people also put dates because dates also remind us of color of mortar. And also some people put also nuts and apricots and cinnamon and wine. So there is a little bit similarity in that. So this is haroset for anusim or oppressed Jews. Anusim, anybody knows what anusim means? Anosim.
No.
So anosim it's another name. It comes from the Portugal language for Jews who were converts, who were converted, were forced to convert to Christianity during their persecution, during the Inquisition. So some people do not call anymore Moranos, right? You're more familiar with Moranos, right? You're familiar with the word Moranos? Right, that the secret Jews who practice Judaism in Spain, right, underground Jews, Moranos. So right now, this definition anosim is more appropriate because Moranos in Portuguese language means, or Spanish means pigs, right? So anosim is more appropriate name for oppressed Jews or conversos, people, Jews who were forced to convert to Judaism. So, and that community also the community from Spain fled during Inquisition to Cuba. And in Cuba, where Jews have difficulty practicing their religion, traditional fruits are often not available. So apples and nuts and dried fruits, it's impossible to find. So Cuban Jews create a recipe, right, of haroset. They call haroset of the oppressed. So they put basically matzah, honey, cinnamon, and wine. Okay, and that's how they make the haroset. But it also reminds us that there are so many Jews who are still oppressed, and the Cuban Jews like a symbol. I also could say the Russian Jews also like a symbol of the Jews who were oppressed. So this is the haroset of the oppressed Jews. So also in Sephardic culture, it's very interesting that Sephardim just say the blessings for 4 cups, but they only say for the first and the third cup, right? We say brachot for all 4, and they think they just say for the first and the third. So they just, think it just covers, it's fine. So it's just interesting the difference between our seders and the Sephardic seders. Okay, less is more, right? And also Rabbi mentioned that in Italian and Spanish homes, the leader wears the white dress and white kaftan or robe, and also some pretend that they are pharaoh, right? They wear a crown, pretending that they're pharaoh, and the pharaoh goes around, the table, supervising this onion whipping. So there is, you could tell that is very important part of the Seder. So this is called mimona. Mimona, it comes from Arabic word. It's a celebration that marks the end of the Pesach. So obviously there are several ways to celebrate crossing of the sea. And a lot of Sephardic synagogues that in the Mediterranean countries, they open the synagogue 1 minute after midnight, and they have this huge feast, right, of mimona and a lot of food. And the reason it's called mimona, because it honors Rabbi Maimon, who was the father of Moses Maimonides. And Maimonides was a beloved rabbi for Moroccan Jews. As you know, Maimonides lived also in Spain, and there is actually in Cordova there is a sculpture of him. So he was up until now, if you travel to Spain, you could see the sculpture of the Maimonides in Cordova. So this is just a picture of Mimana that's so festive. You could see the end of Seder, end of the Passover, everybody's happy eating hametz and everything, right? So there's another picture, and so yeah, I was going to finish with Adirhu, and if you have any questions, Rabbi, or you want people.
No, amazing. I haven't seen some of those things. That's fascinating. We would love to answer. We know that the time is late, so we would love to answer any questions. Thank you, Cantor. Any questions that you have? I saw that there was a question in the chat about Orthodox. Do the Orthodox eat, Ashkenazi Orthodox eat rice? The answer is no, by and large, no. Any other questions at all that you have, or anything that you're wondering about?
Marlene, there is Marlene and Sharon.
Well, I was fascinated about the I believe in Mexico, where the people who didn't even know that they had Jewish ancestry would make a bread that was flat. And it reminded me of the weekend that we had some years ago about the conversos and all the habits that they did, that they didn't know that it came from Jewish customs, like sweeping into the middle of the room so the dust wouldn't go on the mezuzah. And my question is, I didn't know about what you mentioned. I would like to learn more about what you said happened in Spain a few years ago, of a whole bunch of people converting. I think you said converting back to Judaism.
Yeah, I will find, maybe there is an article I read that, in Barcelona, I think, Rabbi, right? In Barcelona was the community that they like converted to Judaism. They found out that they are, their ancestors were Marana Jews or conversos, and they just, have had some customs, like you said, didn't know that they were Jewish, like lighting candles on Shabbat, but they just were lighting candles. They don't know why they're lighting candles. So,
Well, I think that's very exciting because I went on Rabbi Amy's trip to Spain, and I found it, a lot of it, very depressing because this is where there used to be a Jewish community. This is where there used to be a Jewish community before 1492, and so I think that's very exciting.
yes, I mean,
The pockets, right? The pockets, the reemergences that we see in tucked away little communities where there was a very small Jewish community that is growing slowly, right? In some places, which is it's astonishing, right? And really speaks to not just our resilience, but our institutional memory, right? And one of the ways I think that we've been able to do that is by these rituals, right? By observing some of these rituals, sometimes knowingly and sometimes not knowingly yet, is what I like to say. But the rituals that come from some homes, right, where Judaism was the practice, to know, where that comes from. And for homes where Judaism is a newer practice, it's a wonderful opportunity to figure out which customs you do want to incorporate into your Passover table, and then a blend of the both, to really, Passover isn't meant to be. We're not supposed to look at it as mimicking slavery, right? Like Judaism doesn't teach that, right? But to have a sense of and an understanding of what it might have been like by observing some of those customs, and then reading and researching and studying and learning together like this, what we learn about the ethics and the morals of the people then, who was courageous and acted, right? Miriam and Shifra and Pua, and then, why we eat the things that we do and don't, and why we might reintroduce some of the foods that we historically haven't but can, right?
right.
Yeah. There was another question as well just before we went.
Sharon.
Just had a quick comment and question, but I'm fascinated by the fact that, in 2016, that a group of rabbis or whoever it was all of a sudden made this decision. I just can't get over that. Like, it kind of reminds us when I was teaching one year, it happened to be that St. Patrick's Day was on a Friday. And so the Pope, not the Pope, I don't know if it was the Pope or if it was the Bishop of Rochester, gave permission for everybody to have corned beef, that day, even though they're not supposed to eat meat on Friday. I just thought that was really so funny. And this is so odd to me. I did not know this. So it's interesting you brought it out. And like Judy, I think I would have a lot of trouble eating it because I'm always very careful. So, but I just wondered, all of a sudden, what happened that they came, because corn is starch and all those things are starchy and we're not supposed to.
It's not starch. I want to be clear. It's not starch that we're forbidden from eating, right? It's not starch. It's those 5 categories of grain. Right. And what happened was, from those 5 categories of grain, the rabbis got more, the Talmudic rabbis got more and more respected, more and more restricted. It was an if then, right? It's the same argument about why an Orthodox Jew wouldn't eat a veggie burger with cheese, right? Because someone might see him or her eating it and think, that observant Jew is eating a cheeseburger, and now that must be okay, right? It's called ma'arat ayin, right? It's how it looks, right? Right. But there's nothing forbidden about eating the category of kitniot, except that custom became a kind of perceived law. I want to just throw one other monkey wrench into it. Quinoa, kosher for Passover quinoa.
Yeah.
It completely allowed. It doesn't fall into either category. It's a seed, not a grain.
Yeah, I bought it. Yeah, I have it. Yeah. Otherwise, what can we eat?
Yeah. The street that I grew up on when I was a kid, off of Norton Street, my parents lived there forever. And right at the top was the Rabbi of Light of Israel, Rabbi Cohn. Maybe some of you from Rochester will remember that. And his wife, June, and all of their many children. And then the whole other side of my street, it was a long street, and the whole other side of the street basically were Sephardic Jews. And then on my side was like, I don't know, Ashkenazi Jews. It was just, we had a huge Sephardic population because the temple was Orthodox and it was right at the end of the street. And then kind of seemed to, dissipate when they moved. But then several years ago at the book club, the Jewish Book Festival, there is all of a sudden a wonderful group of younger, Sephardic Orthodox Jews, and they created, if you've never seen this, a wonderful cookbook, just a wonderful cookbook, a small one. It's just, and all the different pages are like from Lebanon and, all the in Iran and all these, and you can, if you wanted it, you can get it at the new Light of Israel on Monroe Avenue. But it was fun growing up on that.
We're very Ashka-centric, right? Ashkenaz-centric, whatever that word is, right? We think that the way Eastern European Jews, for most of us, have done things is the right way, right? And there's danger in that. We've always been an adaptive people, and we've always striven to be diverse, but we haven't always succeeded. And this was a groundbreaking move in 2016 to say Ashkenazi observance of Pesach isn't the only way. There's nothing legally Jewish law, right, wrong with eating kitniot, right? And it's not only about what we eat and don't eat at Pesach, right? It's about how we understand the rituals and why we do them and what the aspirational part of it as well.
Yeah, and also like Rabbi, when we make matzah brie, right? We make matzah brie, like I always feel like, when you soak it in the water, I mean, it expands, right? And then you mix with egg, it expands because I feel like this is like breaking the rules of Passover, no? What do you think, Rabbi? No?
I think it's hard to go through Pesach without a matzah brie, but there's a whole school of thought that you shouldn't, right, along the same people who don't follow, non-gebruchs, not dipping anything, people who won't add anything sweet to their matzah. They won't do jam, they won't do chocolate, they won't write anything sweet from made with matzah meal or matzah, right? That is a bread of affliction, and we ought not to sweeten it, right? There's that school of thought too. So, right, it's good learning. Good for us all to think it through.
Right? It's like the Jews in Russia, I mean, we didn't know anything about Passover, so we just ate bread and then matzah. We didn't know you're not supposed to eat matzah, not to eat bread. So it was all, we're all confused there because we didn't know anything about Passover Judaism. So,
Toby, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Listening to you because we've been talking about the two different approaches. So I'm thinking are these by and large recognized as different backgrounds, or is there really a lot of tension between these two? Do we all get along, or we're at odds with each other, these two different origins of?
I think it depends on who you ask. I think right. We're there's Kol Yisrael, right? We're all part of the same Jewish community. The way we observe is in places markedly different. The way we pray is markedly different. The way we observe Passover is markedly different. Not our core values are though, right? Not our core values. Not the core values of Shabbat and tzedakah and community and prayer and Torah. Those are all the same. Some of the ways that we observe those are different. I think there's a tension, but not in a pejorative sense, right? But I say that as an Ashkenazi Jew, and I think it's top-loaded as an Ashkenazi Jew in North America, right? I think if we were to ask people at Light of Israel who are Sephardic, right? If we were to ask people in Sephardic countries, maybe they would feel differently. Maybe I imagine they would, but I think the Cantor and I've talked before. We would very much like to have, when we're back in person, a Sephardic Shabbat and learn more and taste more and hear more and feel more closely how Sephardim practice their Judaism, so that we can have a broader understanding. Yeah. And some rituals, some other rituals around birth and death as well. Yeah, Judy. Thanks, Toby, for the question. It's a great one.
In terms of all getting along, my father's family were Litvaks. My mother's family were Galicianas. I mean, to my grandfather's dying days, he would still be making fun of my father's Litvak accent. I mean, there was this tension there. I mean, and we were not an uncommon family with that there's always this tribalism.
Yeah, yes, there is. When I got married, my ex-husband is American, and my Canadian family was horrified, right? That I had married somebody who wasn't Canadian. Jewish, but not Canadian, right? So I think, we're pretty good at that, right? We're pretty good at that as a people, right? As you say, it's tribal, right? They weren't horrified. I mean, but they were like, you couldn't have found a nice, Canadian Jewish guy, right? Right. So it's I mean, we have different iterations of it. I'm sure the Cantor's family wanted her to marry a Russian guy, right? I think those are some of our preconceived, not so helpful, but preconceived old world ideas that comes from the Bible, right? You marry in, right? Endogamy, right? We were talking about in Bible study, right? It's really important to stay in, right? It was historically very important to stay within. Land stayed within, property, business stayed within, family lines stayed within, right? We know differently now. We know differently now that you can live an active, engaged Jewish life and make other choices, other good intentional choices. Any last questions before we let you go to do your Pesach thinking, studying, shopping, cooking?
Marlene has been trying to get.
Well,
in.
I to answer the question about getting along, I have a good friend who's done who's a Mizrahi Jew, who's done a lot of speaking and writing about being treated as second-class citizens, second-class Jews. So there is a lot of stuff there.
And in Israel especially, by the way. Right? In Israel, the Ethiopians had a bear of a time when they moved to Israel. The Russians did as well. And yeah, that notion, by the way, of the potato on the Seder plate was that Ethiopians couldn't stomach anything else when they came from Ethiopia to Israel. And the Israeli doctors, the only thing that they could stomach, quite literally, was rice and potatoes. And so that's we're supposed to see that as a modern day exodus from Ethiopia to Israel, right? And that's how we commemorate on the Seder plate. So yeah. There's right with lots of so many of us have caste, the book Caste in our head as well, right? All the different tiers of discrimination. There is that in our community too, and I think depending on where you sit, there you're either working toward bringing that into better balance or living in a bubble. Yeah. Well, anyway, we are thankful to learn with all of you and thankful to be with you always. And your questions are wonderful. And let us know what you've done differently this year at Pesach time, maybe, or what you've done that's the same, or just what you're doing that has elevated and amplified the meaning this year for you. Truly, I'd love to know, because this is another funky year of observance. So we would love to know from you what you're doing.
I have to get to Wegmans and buy a bunch of scallions right now.
Yeah,
so.
I was thinking about that too.
There'll be a run on scallions.
I think the kids would like that.
And beans.
I think it's
Right.
scallions would be very, very cathartic, I think.
Go with rice. Go with rice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good health to everybody. Chag Sameach.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Chag Sameach.
That was
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Keep healthy.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Never seen my leave button.